Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Atlanta Press Club. My name is Christy Wooten. I'm president of the club. Thank you for joining us today for our check-in series event, Hyperlocal Summit, navigating the role of community-level newspapers and reporting. Today, we're hosting a roundtable discussion with the journalists and publishers who are filling the gaps and pushing the envelope in Atlanta media. As we all know, the local media landscape in Atlanta and beyond has changed dramatically over the past decade, and it's happening in every city and town across the country. We hope today's discussion will shed some light on the new business models and hybrid approaches to information that are happening in the Atlanta media market and everywhere. Thank you for supporting the work of the Atlanta Press Club by attending this event today. We'd like to remind you that if you have questions for our speakers or moderator, please type them into the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can visit atlantapressclub.org to register for our future events, to make a donation to the club, or to join as a member. We would love to have you. So we have a full house today, and I think we're ready to get started. Today, we've asked Chris Jose to moderate the program. Chris is an Emmy-winning journalist from WSB-TV, and he currently serves as the Cobb County Bureau Chief for the station. Before he arrived in Atlanta in 2017. Chris worked in Dallas, Texas, and in Denver, Colorado, and in Cedar Rapids, Iowa stations there. So we're happy to have him today. Everybody, please welcome Chris Jose.
Hey, thanks for your time, Christy. Thanks to the Atlanta Press Club and our panelists this afternoon. Of course, thanks to our audience. And as Christy just mentioned, I'm currently the Cobb County Bureau Chief here at Channel 2 Action News, WSB-TV. I arrived back in 2017. I took over the role of Cobb County Bureau Chief when Ross Cavett retired in that same year. So I was actually stationed from the Bureau, I should say from Midtown for about 6 to 7 months. And then he got promoted to Cobb County Bureau Chief, and I've been here ever since. And as every panelist here knows, there's real value of community reporting and the neighborhoods that we serve. You're covering everything from local government to the school district to public safety and everything else in between. And as we know, we've seen this last news cycle in the last year with the pandemic, and community-based reporting, in my opinion, is more important than ever. And I think a lot of our panelists will agree with that, and I'm sure we're going to get into this. With that said, enough about me. I'd like to get into our panel now. First, let's welcome Ajoa Danso. She is a freelance writer for canopyatlanta.org. Next, we have Mike Jordan, editor-in-chief, butter.atl. And Robin Kemp, founder, the Clayton Crescent. We would also like to welcome Keith Pepper, owner and publisher, Springs Publishing, and Dan Wisenhunt, founder of Decatorish. And thanks to each of you for being here with us this afternoon, guys. And with that said, we have a lot of subjects to tackle, so we're going to move right into questions. First, let's talk about the changing media landscape and how this affected working journalists. I'd like to hear from Robin first. And Robin, you were laid off and started your own publication, the Clayton Crescent. Walk us through what happened and why you felt your publication might fill a need in the market.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I was a crime and safety reporter for the Clayton News Daily, which has gone from being a daily that puts out a weekly paper to just calling itself the Clayton News now. We had a very short staff to begin with. We had 4 reporters between the Clayton and the Henry papers and 1 editor. COVID-19 cut that in half, and then about a month later, cut me off, so that was half again, leaving them with 1 reporter and 1 editor to cover those 2 papers. And basically, they're what you call a ghost newspaper now. They take a lot of feeds from CNN and from, all those other agencies that offer feeds, but kind of just take up space and don't really touch on local news. And it's really difficult because, I don't want to badmouth them, but they're in a very impossible position. On the one hand, one person can't do everything. On the other hand, on that morning, the first thing I did when I hung up the phone with my boss was I walked in the next room, one person, and proceeded to continue doing everything I had been doing, and then some. So what a lot has transpired since then. In November, I was just doing routine election coverage at the county level. And just because of the way that the returns came back, it turned into this huge international thing. And people started giving me money in an old GoFundMe that I did not ask them to give me. So it was kind of a blessing and a curse because I was able to, get the operation really off the ground and stop taking my little couple of $100 a month for a week out of my unemployment check and using that to try and do something and actually move the thing forward. But the problem was that I was not already set up as a 501c3 and had taken some donations through, just GoFundMe and Facebook on a very small level from friends and family kind of thing. When I told the Institute for Nonprofit News that I had started doing this, they freaked out and they said, "Oh, no, you can't do it in that order. You did it backwards. You have to have the 501c3 in place before you take any donations." Oh my God. Fortunately, I have a great help in Richard Griffiths, who's another ex-CNNer and who has a lot of experience in the nonprofit space. And he had connections with lawyers and accountants and people to help me get everything put together the right way. And just yesterday, we got our 501c3 letter. So in the interim, a lot of things have happened in terms of coverage and in terms of recognition. And I'm just going to take a pass on all that so some other people can talk. But there's a lot in there to go over in terms of how it works as a news operation.
And thanks for that, Robin, and congratulations to you. That's a big day.
Thank you. Yeah, we're real happy about it.
Let's go to Keith here. Keith, also last year, you stepped in to purchase Springs Publishing, which includes Atlanta In Town, the Reporter newspapers, and Senior Living. Even the Atlanta Journal-Constitution questioned your decision in an opinion piece by Bill Torpy that called it, quote unquote, fake joy. Explain your reaction and where you want to take the company.
Well, I knew there at some point in my life the AJC would call me crazy. I just wasn't sure what it would be, what the reason would be. But thanks for the question. Thanks for having us and having me join this panel. I mean, the joy, if it was fake, when I spoke to Bill, if he thought it was fake then, and then he would be shocked at how much fun I've been having just in the first 3 or 4 months that we've been producing. I think we just put out my 4th monthly paper, and it has filled every piece of the sort of 3 buckets that a lot of people in Atlanta talk about around corporate, civic, and cultural. For me, it's been so far so good on all of those in all of those buckets. So it's exceeded the expectations in that regard. But for me, I was looking for a way to get more engaged in the community. I grew up working in journalism. My first job was at Cox WSB Radio when I was 16. So it comes naturally to me. My uncle was a reporter for the Baltimore Sun during Watergate. So I think it just was a natural fit. And for me at the time when I was going through the process of looking at the company and looking at making an acquisition, and let's be real, it's a small business. So I don't want to use words that are too grandiose, but I asked friends who were in very senior, very influential media roles in Atlanta and New York and LA to talk me out of it. Knowing me, knowing the business, I showed them all the financials and I said, talk me out of this. Doesn't it sound crazy? And people who knew me to a person, no one would. So we're having a lot of fun, and I think we're making progress.
Thanks so much for that. Let's go to Mike here. Mike, Butter.atl started as a media project by Atlanta creative agency Dagger in 2018 and now operates as a nonprofit nexus for meme culture and authentic storytelling. Tell us when you came on board as editor-in-chief and the niche you see Butter filling in Atlanta now.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here with you. Well, first, just to clarify, Butter is it is a for-profit. So it's not a nonprofit. It is a for-profit, but we feel the same spirit having worked with nonprofit sector. I'm a co-founder of Canopy Atlanta. So hey over there, Joa. So, I would say what we're doing is looking to fill a niche that, in other words, a lot of publications are lamenting that there's been a lowering of hyperlocal journalism across the board. And what we're doing is sort of listening and reflecting in a way that a lot of voices seem to say that they're not getting the same representation in media that Butter is able to give them. And just as Keith was talking about with the corporate, civic, and cultural, Butter wants to exist as a media property as a middle ground between business and culture, with the specific nod that it is the cultural impact of Atlanta that sort of drives a lot of this. So a lot of what we do comes from the love of Atlanta, first of all. And so what we like to look at our news and the products that we're putting out there are in the sense of, if you love Atlanta, what's important to you? And starting with that, and then from that sort of epicenter, as that is our North Star, we can kind of go into any realm we want, because you have to have money to have fun, but you need to have fun if you're going to make money, or else what's it all for? So it's sort of a feedback loop of really caring about this city, really caring about the wider community, and making ourselves smarter and better as we make sure that we continue to have a good time in the city that we all love so much.
Let me ask you this, Mike. Do you think with your publication, you're able to push the envelope even further than, let's say, WSB or some of the local newspapers like the Marietta Daily Journal?
Certainly. I think that with all respect to those publications, and, we're not necessarily here to challenge any size media, big or small, local or national. What we're really just looking to do is speak with the term that everyone is using these days, which is authenticity. And when you have it, you don't have to kind of conjure it up or seek it. You just always come from a place of, we are speaking from an authentic place. We don't expect to be agreed with or for everyone to get some of the jokes. I mean, we look at people who are really into a lot of the cultural signals around Atlanta. So if you are a fan and remember a lot of Outkast's lyrics from their debut album on to now, you'll see a lot of Easter eggs sprinkled throughout our content. And that's specifically making sure that people know that as we go from local to hopefully eventually national and international, we want everyone to know that Atlanta is a city that can support a media company of that value and that magnitude and still remain true to the city.
Thanks for that, Mike. Joa, you're one of many journalists who have either left traditional media for startups or who have begun to engage with funded journalism projects. Tell us about canopyatlanta.org and your work for the platform.
Yeah, so Canopy is a brand new publication started by a number of people, including Mike, who occupied various roles in traditional and non-traditional media in Atlanta, freelancers, former editors, also former CNNers. And the goal is to be a community journalism platform that is really going in depth on the issues that matter to communities and that the communities have told us matter to them. And so I wrote for the inaugural West End issue, which looked at a number of issues in the West End: farming, water boy culture, the West End Mall's future, arts in the West End. And all of those stories and the angles for those stories were chosen by the residents of the community, and then further honed in by 7 community advisory board members who were actually residents, long-term residents of the West End. And it was an interesting experience because usually when someone's editing your work, they don't necessarily know more about the topic than you do. They're not exactly living around the corner from the places that you're writing about. And so it was really great to have that feedback from community members and kind of know before you hit publish or before you send something out into the world that you are doing right by the community. A lot of the time we're taught that our audience is not important to us as journalists, that we have to write despite what the audience feels, but this is a way that we can write for the audience of the community and for a more general audience of people in Atlanta and beyond. And so Canopy, they paid me $1 per word, which is really great. That's never happened before, coming from a strapped publication that was it's still a little mind-boggling to know that that's a possibility, and that it's a possibility with something so new. And Canopy right now is working toward publishing more, but we're in a fundraising phase, and please donate if you have a little bit of extra cash, if you've got some left over from your stimulus, or if you're just feeling really generous after you read a story. We are accepting funds to keep doing this good work.
$1 per word. That's fantastic. And
Yeah,
who's,
weird. Justice passed.
and I wanted to ask you, who's pitching to you? You mentioned the community. Do you find folks from the community pitching to you all, or are you, and of course, you know, when we're enterprising stories, we hear people talk all the time at being journalists, but who's pitching to you?
So it's more of an outreach because it's brand new. You know, we wanted to make sure that we were dotting all of our I's and crossing all of our T's. So we went into the West End community and asked neighbors what they wanted to see. And about 50 people responded to the survey with things that they wanted to see. And in addition to that, we also had 6 fellows who were from the community who applied to be fellows for Canopy in either writing or editing and photography, and they actually got to go out into the community and work on these stories in real time as emerging journalists.
Thank you. And Dan, your publication, Decatur-ish, has built a reputation for being an insider's guide to everything happening in the city, from weather to schools to MARTA to who's heading the YMCA. Tell us how the publication bridges the gap between community news and, say, a section of a larger publication such as the AJC.
That's a better reputation than I thought we had, so that's good. You know, the AJC used to have a DeKalb bureau. You know, I always find that interesting. They used to have a bureau. They used to staff it with, you know, 2 or 3 reporters. There's 1 million people in DeKalb. There's a lot of readership there, for the reasons that all papers have pulled back. You know, they've tried to do more with less. And my approach to it has always been to clean up, you know, in places where they're not as nimble as they used to be. You know, they're not always going, you know, you might see the AJC and this is not a knock on the AJC. They do great work and they have some very talented journalists, and I'm not bashing them here at all, but, you know, they used to, you know, go to all the meetings. You know, they would go to planning, they'd go to zoning, you know, and a lot of times the news that happens in these little meetings and out of the way places, you know, where like maybe the meeting itself is not the story, but you hear about a new business that's coming along, or you pick up on a trend. So that's, you know, where we've made those inroads. And, you know, I actually used to work for the company that Keith now owns, which is Springs Publishing. So I worked for the Sandy Springs Reporter before I started all this. And one of the things that job taught me was the value of just showing up and being accessible and being somebody that somebody could talk to, or, you know, pick up the phone and call. So we not only cover Decatur, we cover Kirkwood and Eastlake, which are sort of adjacent communities. We cover Avondale Estates, which is sort of an adjacent community. And then there's sort of this North Decatur, hence the ish, right? There's a sort of North Decatur area that's not in the city, but, you know, there's no boundary in terms of commerce. People go there to shop. People from there come to Decatur to shop. And we also recently started TuckerObserver.com, which is another website, and that covers Tucker, Clarkston, and Stone Mountain. And really is kind of our catch-all for like the bigger DeKalb news that maybe doesn't fit squarely into what we're doing with Decatur-ish. And again, that's just the same principle, you know, show up, be there, ask questions, you know, be at the meetings that nobody else is going to be at. We get so much news just by being present in places and being at the right place at the right time.
And thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a great point. Just last night, there was a town hall meeting that a Cobb County commissioner had. Now, granted, it was virtual for most of the audience members, but, you know, I was home at work. I just got home from work. It was past dinner time. My wife was asking me, you know, I had my headphones in, had my phone. She's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm actually listening into this town hall meeting that Commissioner Richardson's putting together." And I'm glad I did, because I got like 4 or 5 story ideas from that 2-hour session. one hit on COVID, one hit on public safety. The crime rate here in Cobb County has gone up, and found 3 other stories in that 2-hour session. So thanks for bringing that up. Has it been more difficult for you to go to those meetings because we are in the middle of a pandemic?
Oh, it's gotten infinitely easier because everything is virtual now, and it's just delightful. And I really hope that they continue to do that on some level or another because it makes it a lot easier. You know, I rely a lot on freelancers, and it makes it a lot more attractive to a potential freelancer to say, hey, can you cover this meeting? You don't even have to leave your home. You know, you can just watch it and maybe call people after the fact. I know some people, you know, place a whole lot of value in physically being there, and I like that sometimes. But for the sheer amount of things that we do, like I hope it carries on. Like I'm on a board for my son's school, and you know, I love the fact that we can have a Zoom meeting. You know, you can pop in, do the meeting, you don't have to drive anywhere. So I actually think that part of it has been really easy. Where we miss things is the events, because if there's one thing about people that's true, is they like to see themselves in the paper. That's just a thing. And you know, I like being able to send my photographer out to different events, and you know, we put the photos on the website, and everyone was like, hey, I saw your picture in Decatur's, you know, the whole thing. But we can't do that as much because there's just not. But that's starting to come back too. So we should be pretty good on that in the next few months, I think.
Hey, Robin, let's go to you here. The Washington Post called your journalism contributions during the election, quote unquote, service journalism. Tell us what that means to you, and do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I do. I really, really do. That's what I'm trying to do here. Because we are in kind of a news desert in Clayton County, and really didn't get a whole lot of serious coverage before the past couple of years, and really leading up to the past year or so. I feel real responsibility to fill that space down here. I did 2 years primarily as crime and safety reporter, but really kind of also doing, you know, local government, city council meetings, board of commissioners, and things like that as well. So it was more like a general reporting thing with a little extra dose of crime. Now what's happening is that I find myself doing a lot less of that sort of mugshot journalism. You know, it's good for it's good TV, right? If you can go down and get a perp walk, that's great. You know, it may work for what you're doing, but for what I'm doing, it's not helping me to spend a lot of time chasing mugshots, you know. And then there's the whole issue of whether or not mugshot journalism is even relevant anymore. But what I'm more interested in is sort of from the grassroots up instead of from the top down. I'm interested in the citizens, the readership, being able to know what their elected officials and their appointed officials and the people in power where they live are doing, so that they can then decide what they want to do about it. If anything, whether they want to hold them accountable, whether they like what they're doing, whether they don't like what they're doing. And without that kind of real basic meat and potatoes coverage, you know, politicians run wild. That is what they do. And they have been running wild in Clayton County for a long time, in municipalities especially. What the problem is with covering it down here, especially as a one-person shop, is that we have 7 municipalities and county agencies on top of county agencies. Like we have a police department and a sheriff's department at the county level. We have a jail and a prison at the county level. We have, you know, 7 city councils and all the myriad boards that go with all of those. And Clayton County itself has something like 25 appointed boards. It's insane. So what happens is, instead of all getting together and meeting on different days of the week, which, you know, is my dream and fantasy that they would do this, they never will. Frequently 2 or 3 even agencies or boards or councils will meet at the same day at the same time, or overlapping between 6:30 and 7. And you can't be everywhere at once. So you have to kind of pick and choose your battles. And like what Dan was saying about the usefulness of having video live streams or some kind of live stream of the proceedings, that can be very helpful at times. It also can be problematic, as in the case of Forest Park, which I've had a couple of long drawn out legal battles with them that are still kind of ongoing. about physical access to the meetings because they were not providing a viable live stream. And how can you cover something you can't hear? You can't do it. You know, it's the same as just locking the door and blacking out the windows. There's nothing happening there. So there's that. A live stream that becomes a way of preventing the public from being able to attend a meeting is not, in my opinion, truly a live stream. The other issue is, just the physical process of trying to gather information in terms of documents. If you need to go down to the courthouse, previous, in the olden days, I would go down to the courthouse a few times a week, just get in, go down there, get what I needed and get out. Well, unlike a lot of counties, our stuff is not online. Some of Superior Court is now on Peach Court, which is very helpful. But I can't read all the case documents, and they don't have everything that's been filed at the county level. And so if I want to go to the county and get documents to do a story, I have to make an appointment online, and they get back to me in a day or a few days. And then in a day or a few days, I go down there and I show my ID and I get my papers brought up to me. And they look at my ID and make sure it's me, and I give them a credit card and they go charge it and come back. All of that, it's put a huge, massive bar in front of just doing basic, gumshoe footwork that you're supposed to do all the time, and really you're supposed to do every day. But you do what you can. My concern is that if these kinds of situations continue, where you have a single newspaper that is no longer truly doing what it really ethically should be doing, which is to cover all of that, and not just turn press releases, and not just show pretty pictures of some staged event of a groundbreaking or whatever, without doing any critical thinking or any digging or any investigation whatsoever on the front end. You're not doing your job. So I just feel like that it falls to me at this point to try and sort of be a wall against all of that, and hopefully grow the Clayton Crescent to where we can hire other people and bring them along and train them so that this will live long beyond me and be a force in this community of, we're talking almost 500,000 people if you count the Southern Crescent. It's got to be done.
Yeah, certainly, Clayton County is huge. I know it's a big focus for WSB. Tom Jones usually goes down there to cover stories for us all the time. And every time I see a Tom Jones story down there in Clayton County, it's some wild, crazy story.
Yeah.
And he really does a good job of finding the value in those stories. Being based out there in Clayton County, and you kind of ran through some of that stuff already, but how do you find those stories with true value? You mentioned like chasing around mugshots. We don't do that anymore. For example, for crime stories, if you are pursuing a crime story in Clayton County, how do you decide what's valuable to the community and what's not?
Wow, that's good. It's very much on a case-by-case basis. And there's also the factor of how does it fit into the rest of the load? But I guess that kind of goes without saying. It would have to be something that affects a large number of people, or that is so egregious that it merits attention. And a crime story doesn't necessarily have to be told from, the alleged criminal, the suspect who hasn't been convicted yet's point of view. It can be told from the perspective of investigators who are looking at law enforcement who may have engaged in misconduct but have not yet been convicted of doing so, right? Last summer, the feds were down there looking at Sheriff Hill. He's got several suits in federal court, and he likes to get on Nixle and communicate with the public and his base that way, and throw in some, side swipes at the lying media or whatever. But he's someone who is not accountable to the public, and that's a story that has to be covered from time to time. There was a story last summer where the Clayton County Police Department, which is really pretty transparent for the most part, had an incident where an officer responded to several teenagers who were running around with a pellet gun and waving it in a convenience store and kind of clowning around and threw it in the bushes. But they got a call, there's somebody with a gun in this store. They didn't know it was a pellet gun. They didn't know, they just knew somebody was armed. And so when the cop rolled up on these kids who fit the description, he came out with his, weapon because it was a gun call. And the people in the neighborhood were stopping in the middle of the street and pulling out their cell phones to record the interaction, as they should have. But this was a huge controversy in our community, humongous, and the police department is still taking a lot of heat for it. So stories like that, that's what I cover. I might cover something smaller if it works, but what that is and how to define that might shift on any given day. There was a barricaded person this weekend. I couldn't deal with that because actually I wasn't even in town, but I might have had I been here. So.
Thanks, Robin. I think you mentioned it's all about finding the value in each of those stories, whether that's a crime story or something with local government. So thank you for that. Let's go to Mike here. Mike, Butter's content reflects Georgia's and Atlanta's diversity. Do you feel that there is a recent history of whitewashing cultural content in traditional media outlets? And if yes, how so?
I don't feel that there's a recent thing. I think it's a historical thing. I think it's what happens. I've personally been frustrated being a journalist here in Atlanta since 1997. Just that the very, very low number of not just until recently, not just African-American journalists, but editors. And that's always been a thing of mine, is that without that sort of positioning inside the media landscape, particularly in a city where the majority of the residents of Atlanta proper continue to be African-American, there's not representation inside the decision-making room, the conference room, the editorial planning Zoom call that includes and has regard to the cultural experience of living in Atlanta, which is, influenced by African-American residents and what they have historically done without a lot of people paying enough attention. So I not only see that as something that needs to be fixed, there's an inherent motivation there. You're missing the story. Anyone who does not have Black and brown and persons of all different spectrum of diversity is missing the story. And what I've always enjoyed is being at places that understand that and having some sort of leeway and some type of leverage to be able to speak to what I see going on and what people tell me who do not contact major media most of the time, or if they are, their stories may just not take precedent over whatever the extractive and bleeds lead sort of news that happens. And what you end up getting then is stories that, again, other publications don't have. And you watch as those media companies try to evolve into something that looks like that, which is a very futile effort, I would say, if you don't have the basis of what it takes to really have any kind of inroad. So, I mean, it's what Butter is able to do is, by the fact that we started as an Instagram channel, and again, it was an idea to show brands how to perform, content as an actual service to a profitable business venture, whatever they were doing. What it has evolved into now is, because Butter's Instagram channel is almost at 100,000 followers for a hyperlocal audience, we now have credibility for speaking at certain topics, for being aware of certain cultural happenings, for being informed about news that a lot of other media companies are going to have to struggle to catch up on. We don't have the same resources that they may have in the sense of, large staff and the same amount of budget, but we are growing. And a lot of our growth comes from the fact that the audience is paying attention to what we're doing. And that comes from a fact of not just saying we have to have Black, we have to have brown, we have to have LGBTQ, we have to check boxes. It's knowing that without people and those sorts of relationships in those communities and the trust that you get by being careful with the story, then we won't have the information that anyone is looking for.
That's so important that you just mentioned that. I believe I'm one of 5 Asian American journalists on the air here in the Atlanta TV market as far as TV news is concerned. How do we recruit people of color to either work for a publication like yours, or whether that's a bigger newspaper like the AJC? What do we need to do to make sure that our newsrooms, our publications are a reflection of the community, especially as diverse as Atlanta?
This organization, the Atlanta Press Club, is obviously great, and a lot of organizations are there. But instead of just shouting out organizations, I just say like the work that the organizations make their missions. Mentorship is very important. That gumshoe work that Robin was speaking about. I mean, go to the Atlanta University Center. You have colleges, you have a mass comm department at Clark Atlanta that is award winning. That's great. There are students of color at Kennesaw State. There's Georgia State. There's plenty of people here. What I find to be most interesting is that most of those people end up leaving the city because they don't get the same fair shake and opportunity. And so if that tends to be an issue of proper training and exposure, then those of us who are in position have to put on our mentorship caps. And we actually have to go out and assist people. And that's what Canopy Atlanta does. That's what us at Butter, because obviously there's also this new sort of this versus that thing with journalists and influencers. And my own personal take on that is I am loath to demonize an influencer, because what they are in many ways is an independent publisher. And all they need to do is learn the ethics and the rules around actual journalism in order to not only be a good journalist, but to be ahead of you and to think about things in a way that the traditional church and state wall have sort of put some journalists at a disadvantage for the new market. So the opportunities are there. Those in position today, they need to not be afraid of the newer upcoming digital media children of the new era that have come along and disrupted. We all need to work together. And in order to get more journalists of color and journalists from underrepresented communities involved, those of us who know the tricks of the trade need to share that information.
That's it. And if I could jump in really quickly, Mike, I'm really glad you said that. I am obviously a white person working in a predominantly African-American and brown area, and with a very heavy Asian population as well. And I can't change the skin I'm in, but I can certainly open doors for other people. And my whole purpose in this, as I said before, is to grow it beyond myself and have it be something that could be in the future, funding permitting, something where we could hire and train, in particular, people of color who represent this community. So I just want to throw that out there.
Thanks, Robin. Hey, Keith, let's go to you here. Your publications are partially filling the hole left behind by Creative Loafing, which was different from Atlanta In Town. How are you bringing the alternative news weekly element into the present day?
Well, I haven't actually really thought of it exactly like that, but I guess, I wish that as someone that grew up in Atlanta and read Creative Loafing from the time I was probably in my early teens, I wish it was, it's still here. So I don't want to, we shouldn't be talking about the demise totally of Creative Loafing, because there's a box about 100 feet from my building that has Creative Loafing. So I think, the way I think about it across the entire ecosystem, whether it's Creative Loafing or any of the co-panelists, I want a robust media, local, hyper-local media environment where everyone's thriving. We're not going to, dance on the graves of other people. It's hard it's hard out there as it is. And I think, for us to make it, for everyone to make it, we need a robust ecosystem of local journalism. So I just want to make that clear. And the, on the alternative media front, as events begin to come back, we are doing things, we are looking at that. We launched a new events calendar, which we didn't have before across all of our titles, so that we hope that as events come back, we can be a resource for the arts organizations. And also, quite frankly, as a way for advertisers to reach, for promoters and venues to reach the audience, because we think that there is good demand there. So we're not tacking to the, if we want to call it the far left of alternative media. with Atlanta in town. But I think we're trying to show a little bit more personality in some of our newer products. We've got an email newsletter that we've launched, which is called Rough Draft, which has a little bit more personality driven content, which is actually authored by a former creative loafing writer. So maybe in those ways it answers your question, that we're picking up a little bit of that, but I want a world where we all are able to survive, for sure.
What do you mean by personality driven? If you can dive into that a little bit.
Well, in the email newsletter, it's not an opinion piece. I mean, we look at folks like what Mike's doing at Butter as inspiration for that, or the Morning Brew, or some of these other newsletters that are out there with a little bit more kind of attitude, and instead of just straight facts. So it's something that, because of the intimacy of the email, because you're in someone's inbox at 7 a.m. and they're probably, they're either in bed or they're just getting out of bed, and you're one of the first things that they may see. We're making it we're not just coming at you with straight hard news. So I think a little bit of, I hope it's personality. Maybe whether it's a good one or not is up for debate, but it, hopefully softens that first dose of news and information that you get, in our case, every morning, or 3 days a week in the morning. So I think that's what I mean.
As far as that email that you send out to your readers, what specific topics do you want to make sure you cover during those 3 days? I know we send out, I think, a newsletter twice a week, or I should say twice a day for SB, and it's literally like the headlines of the day. How does that differ for your group?
Yeah, hopefully completely the other side of the spectrum. So we're trying to give folks, 3 to 5 minutes where they can read an email, and if they want to click out, they can click out to a story. And if they don't click out, they're going to be informed enough to have an interesting conversation at lunch with their friends or their colleagues. And so we're trying to put it all into an email, 5 to 7 stories, 3 to 5 minutes to get through, and really condense it into that. So we also do the type of email that you mentioned, where if you just want the straight headlines, we give that to you as well. What we're seeing, and I think this is, goes to what folks were saying earlier, is the audience, the engagement, and quite frankly, the subscription numbers on that more personality-driven email are exponentially higher than they are on just the headlines email. So, I think there's something there, and we have to, as a news organization, as a company, we have to adapt to that and not just dismiss it as, as influencers or Instagram or something that's just the kids, because I think there really is something there in terms of the engagement. And then we also see it, and I'll speak as a publisher, we also see that the advertisers want that and like that, because it's a much more native, a sort of much more elegant integration than some sort of screaming, banner that's in your face. So it's so far, early days, but I think the proof points are there in many other examples, both in Atlanta with folks like Butter, and then nationally, with the Morning Brew and with the Skim, and then I'll date myself, but with Daily Candy, 25 years ago.
I think it all goes back to that buzzword, right? Authenticity, being authentic.
Well, absolutely. At the end of the day, whether our newsletter makes it, it won't be because it comes at 7, or it won't be because of anything other than that the content's interesting. Because the great thing is that people can read it in 3 to 5 minutes, but the less great thing is they can unsubscribe in about 5 seconds. So we'll see very quickly whether it resonates with people.
Yeah, Joe, let's go to you. You have worked at the anti-poverty organization CARE, which is headquartered right here in Atlanta. How has your work there shaped your views about what community should mean in a city like Atlanta?
That's a tough one. It is definitely a perspective that's different from working in a local organization that works locally. CARE works in over 100 countries, and oftentimes the people that I'm writing about in my job are not neighbors. They're not people whose cultures I'm familiar with. And so there is a fine line between telling a story and doing it well, and telling a story, doing it well, and causing harm in the process. And so one of the things that I've learned in that we're trying to integrate at CARE, we have been integrating at CARE in our storytelling, is uplifting the local organizations in the areas where we are. So even though I might be thousands of miles away from a program or an organization that's doing work in a community in Uganda or Yemen, we have partners on the ground in those areas who can give us source material that is in such a way that we're not going to make missteps while we're conveying somebody else's story. And then in the same capacity, we reach out to our partners and our colleagues in those areas when we're writing something. And sometimes we'll ask, like, is this appropriate? We'll get clearance because there are issues that are so sensitive that as an American who's only ever known a functional government that provides needs to the people without just taking it away at the drop of a hat, or the program that builds your road being cut off by another foreign government, we have to be extra aware of what we're doing and how we're taking those people's stories and how we're using them to make other people feel emotions. We don't want to exploit people's pain in order to get donations or spread awareness. And so we are, my colleagues actually are people who've worked at publications that many of us here have worked at and are trained journalists. And so we take our role seriously. And I think there's a benefit of all of us having been community journalists at some point that allows us to have those ethics and that integrity that pushes us to be better rather than resting on our laurels of understanding how community journalism works.
Hey, Dan, Decatur has always had a distinct personality and culture, even though it's only a few miles away from the center of Atlanta. You've spread beyond the downtown Decatur area. So what has been the biggest challenge at Decatur-ish to keep the news localized?
Well, we haven't really been myopic about news being really local. You know, that's sort of the thing, is our readers are, you know, they work at the CDC and they work at Emory, and they have interests that frankly are beyond the city limits of the city of Decatur. Obviously they care about what goes on at city commission meetings and stuff. So, you know, one of my operating ideas when I went into this was not being so focused on, okay, if it's this far past the city line, we're not interested in that. And part of the whole reason the name came up is because the FBI, I know this is going to sound like a tangent, but I swear I'm going somewhere. The FBI would send out these press releases and they'd say, you know, this person got arrested in Decatur. Okay. Well, the FBI doesn't really sit there and go, okay, did this person live in 30030, or did this person live in Greater Decatur, the whole thing. So whenever you write a story, you know, the initial knee-jerk reaction from the readers would be, well, that wasn't really Decatur. So it's like, we're Decatur-ish, you know, like it's in the ballpark. It's got a Decatur zip code. So I really took the opposite approach of some of the other hyperlocal websites, where I felt like they got a little too zeroed in on this idea of where the line is. And, you know, people from Decatur shop in Tucker. People from Tucker shop in Decatur. You know, I tell people Tucker is like Decatur, but with parking. You know, and that's an important distinction. But yeah, I don't feel that, you know, if anything, my challenge is finding stuff that is of more general interest to people who maybe don't live in Decatur, because we actually have a shocking amount of supporters, financial supporters, who don't live in the city limits, but they live in other states, but they might have like investment properties in Decatur. So like they like the fact that there's a local journalist showing up at the meetings and, you know, making sure they're not wrecking downtown. So we really do have a pretty broad audience for a hyperlocal site. I don't know that that's unique, but it's definitely unusual, I think, for us, for a site of our size anyway.
Hey, Mike, let's go back to you now. And of course, this was national news a few weeks ago, still is. After the spa shootings on March 16th, Water was straight out of the gate with an email newsletter about uplifting the Asian American community in Atlanta. How do you balance your unique mix of entertainment, news, and activism with sensitivity, especially in light of tragedies?
That's a great question because we are actually just yesterday, uh, a couple of team members, we had a conversation in our morning stand up. We have a call in the morning just to kind of see what temperature is out there in Atlanta and anything that's popped up that we should be watching in addition to our other planning. But there was a situation actually where someone had sent a message to us and saying that we kind of could have used a little bit of a different language with a post that we put up pretty much once a month. And that monthly post is sort of like the top story of the month. And for the top story for this past month in March, it was the spa shootings. And there was an image of the gold spa. And someone misread. And really, when I say misread, not to blame them for it, because I understand and we understand that emotions around this, there are some sensitivities that we want to be very careful navigating. But in our caption, even, we were speaking in solidarity and saying, sometimes, the news isn't great, we stand with this community. Someone just kind of saw the image and said that it was, maybe not in the best care that we said that. And we removed the post. And, when we come back and we put up the one for next month, our plan is to let folks know the same way that any other journalism, any other publication would do. It's sort of a correction, but just to say, hey, you may have noticed this is a new image for this month, and we'll switch it to something maybe all-star or something else that may have happened. There was the craziness of the lady with the U-Haul truck, which if you didn't see that story, I'm not going to repeat it. But, we'll say that this was, if you notice, at the request of, a member of our audience, we altered this and we in no way meant anything. So there are sensitivities. When we speak to those issues, we are, again, speaking from a voice that actually cares and is not being performative. And our audience, we hope, realize that. And we hope that we don't ever come across as a publication that is too big for our britches to say that we could have done something better, to not look at things and observe and say, is this a place that we should even be speaking to? Or does this need us to chime in on it? Is this something where we would need members of this community or that community to actually speak instead of the folks inside of this organization? So we're just very mindful of that. And those kinds of behaviors and those kinds of approaches are what keep you out of a lot of those sorts of situations where you find yourself apologizing profusely. And it's generally because you just never came into it with the right spirit and the right intention.
Thanks, Mike. We're going to get into some audience questions now. And this one is for everyone, so feel free to jump in. How are publications making money these days? Ads, subscribers, donations? What are the challenges today with monetizing content?
Well, it's a challenge because if you're giving it away for free, I mean, it's kind of hard to monetize. And that's really the genie's out of the bottle on the paywall thing. I felt that for a while. So we have two means of support. So we have contributors, people who pay us like $3, $6, $12 a month. During the pandemic, we went from 700 of those to 1,500 of those, which was awesome. And then we also have a mix of advertisers, which is great. And we love our business supporters as well. And the paying contributors get an e-edition that we put together just for those folks that comes out once a month. And it's like a little monthly magazine. So I do think diversity in your revenue streams is key. I don't think you can be totally dependent on one or the other, because the way advertising works, as Keith can probably tell you, is it's feast or famine. You'll have 1 month where you make all the money, and then you'll have 3 months where you make no money. And you have to figure out how to navigate that. And having the paying supporters is nice because it shores that up. So you don't have to worry about, those lean months. Sorry to hijack that, but I just wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I would say that Dan's right. This model is evolving very quickly. So whether it's donations or memberships, like Canopy's doing or that Decatur-ish does. We're 100% ad supported right now. I don't know what that will look like in 3, 5, 10 years. I mean, the model is continuously evolving. I think that there's interesting revenue streams for media organizations around events. I think there's interesting monetization streams around merchandise. So if you look at companies like the Bitter Southerner, which does it with merchandise and also does it with subscriptions or membership, and also probably has a little bit of advertising there. That's an interesting model. So it's evolving. We happen to be 100% ad supported right now.
We're still 100% donations. I understand about the paywall, but my issue is that I serve a community that doesn't have all that money, and I really don't want to do what the local paper did and put things behind a paywall. I want to ask them straight up front, please support this if you believe in it. You've got a couple of, I don't want to call them angel donors, but people who are giving some significant money pretty soon now that we have the 501c3. But we're kind of handing out. I am looking at doing a newsletter. That's more time. That's more stuff. That's more how do I rearrange my schedule? And that's more content to generate. But it's something that is a value added. I'm looking at doing a couple of community events that may serve as fundraisers now that we're coming out of COVID just a little bit. So that's in the works. And of course, there's grants, and of course, there are sponsorships, which are nonprofits speak for ads. And now that we're in a position to go forward and do it that way, we're going to be very aggressively going out into the community. It may not be me personally, because I'm trying to keep a firewall between me and editorial and the back office, which is handling all the money stuff that I don't want to touch. But that is what we do. It's going to be kind of like your basic public radio, community radio level of funding. It's going to be very little, and hey, if it goes belly up in a year, I tried, right? But that's, I cannot put a firewall between me and folks who need this information. I can't do it.
We're closing in almost 3 o'clock, guys, so we're going to wrap things up here. One last question, though. Are there different challenges for hyperlocal publications with regard to fighting disinformation that the national landscape is struggling to fight against?
I would say a strong yes on that one. From my perspective, I think the biggest issue is visibility. When you're a hyperlocal paper, you're writing for such a small audience that is going to be looking at your work, and there's so few people who are just going to come across it, especially in the speed that the news cycle moves these days. You only have so much time to get a story out there, and it's so much harder to make a correction when there is one needed. A great example of this is the voting rights legislation that's happening in the state. Well, I mean, it's signed. It feels like it's still happening, though. People are looking a lot at Georgia, and there's a lot of misinformation, misconceptions. That's true, but not quite, and footnotes and asterisks required on all the little pieces of information that are coming out from national outlets. And this is one of those scenarios where people feel like they can't really get the correct picture from the national outlet, and they're not sure if they trust the local outlet to be doing a good job, because the entire way information is coming out is so disorganized. And so I think the Trump years especially taught us this, and I think we'll have to be even more on our mark during the Biden years, as far as making sure we're getting out the right information, that our communities know that they can come to us with information, that we are going to be the ones giving the honest take or doing what we can, because we're going to be more invested in those stories than the national outlets or regional outlets are. And I'm saying that a little bit as a native Georgian. I'm always going to look toward the local paper before I go somewhere else when it's a big deal.
Yeah, we're in an era where there's national media is parachuting in more than ever. So I think there's not only the responsibility of taking better care of the facts, because your neighbor next door may also be a member of your audience, and you'll hear directly from them when you do something that is just lazy. But there's also even a monetization, motivation there is to get, if you get it right, then your audience is coming back to you, because if one erroneous source is aggregated a million times over and it's on MSN and it's on Yahoo and it's on everywhere else, if you're the one who actually took the 5 seconds to fact check that piece of information and you make sure that yours isn't, eventually people are going to realize when those retractions and apologies, hoping they happen, when those happen, you're going to get the kudos for actually having cared enough about the job. And that will bring in the people who are looking for trustworthy sources to support and to pay attention to.
Never in my life had I ever been targeted as a journalist per se until about a year and a half, 2 years ago, about 2 years ago. And it was just such a random thing in Jonesboro, Georgia. I was covering a fire, and I was talking to this couple. They were out walking their dog and chatting nicely, and all of a sudden the woman started turning the conversation. She was trying to try me. She wanted to see what my politics were and where I was at personally. And then she just went off and started going like, why are you meeting this and that? She started cursing me out. And I'm just standing there covering a fire. I hadn't done anything to warrant any of this. And I tried to tell her, I don't really want to talk about politics. It's not really germane to what I'm doing. And she lost it. And I was so angry. I thought about it. I stood there, I said, man, this is what it's coming to. And I walked after this lady and I went up to her and I said, my name is Robin Kemp and I'm a journalist. I work right over there at the Clayton News Daily. You can come to my office anytime. And I walked on. And that's what we're living in now. And it was so bizarre then, but with everything that's happened since, you can kind of see that it fits into a bigger picture of disinformation that's being done on a larger level by larger sources for other purposes. When it comes down to you on the street like that, the potential for it being very dangerous is obvious. She could have been somebody unstable who had a weapon or decided to club me over the head with whatever she had on her. But the real disinformation that I see is not on that level. It's very calculated, and it's from government officials, and some of it is PR, and some of it is straight propaganda. And of course, we're getting into election season, and people do what they do because they want to get reelected. But there are other people who really fear the press because whatever reason, maybe they have a reason to. Maybe they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing. Maybe they don't want to be exposed to doing it. Or maybe they're just paranoid. And I think a lot of them are just paranoid. But they will do everything they can to control the messaging and not have a press conference and not return your calls and not. And it breeds distrust, not so much with members of the press, but with the people who are looking to us to give them information. And what this has evolved into in the case of the Clayton Crescent, and I'm not saying this to brag, I'm just reporting what happened here. I get people telling me everywhere I go, thank you, thank you, thank you, keep telling the truth. They are always emphasizing, there's this value of truth that they feel like they're not getting somewhere else. And I think that what we're doing in these niche spaces is we are providing a place for the truth to come out.
I'm going to just jump in there to close us out today. And to Robin's point, I want to say one of the threads that I thought that brought this group together, this amazing group of panelists, thank you all so much, was that you each share this responsibility to your readers, and not just in part because they're neighbors or you share something in common, maybe like a zip code, but also because that is your role in the community. And we're grateful that all of your organizations are coexisting and working together to provide authenticity and personality, and of course, facts and truth and community perspective to Atlanta. So thank you all. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Thank you, especially Chris Jose, for a great job moderating. Great questions and great answers from our panelists. And thank you for the audience for your questions as well. I want to thank Robin and Keith in particular, and welcome them. They are our newest board members at the Atlanta Press Club. So thank you for taking part in this and jumping into the swimming pool with us. So thanks for that. And also thank you to another one of our board members, Sonia Tucker, who came up with this great idea. And I'm so glad we have been able to talk about this in a hyperlocal summit format today. I just want to remind everybody, if you're interested in supporting the Atlanta Press Club, visit our website at atlantapressclub.org. We've got other great events coming up. We'd love to have everybody involved as a member to donate to the club or to become a sponsor. So thanks again for that, everybody. Have a great day, great panel, and thanks for joining us.